Grimora.
The rain came softly that evening, rushing against the old windows like fingertips searching for a way in. Margaret Pierce stood by the glass, watching the storm gather above the Louisiana wetland. The sky was the color of bruised steel, heavy and trembling. She wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders, though the heat still clung to the air. It had been 3 months since she'd buried Thomas. 3 months since she'd spoken to anyone longer than a few polite words. And now she was standing in a house that wasn't hers, yet somehow felt like it remembered her. The realtor called it the Hollis House, a 19th century Victorian, sitting at the edge of town where the swamp began to swallow the road. The wood was gray and bowed from years of rain, the paint flaking like dead skin. But something about it, its quietness, its isolation, had drawn her in the moment she saw it. "This place needs life again," the realtor said with a nervous smile. "It's been empty for years. Folks say it leaks in every storm." Margaret simply nodded. A leaky roof didn't scare her, not anymore. Now, as the storm rolled closer, she lit a candle and watched the first flash of lightning streak across the sky. The thunder followed seconds later, low and long, rumbling through the floorboards. The house creaked in response. At first she thought it was the wind, but as the rain began to fall harder, the creaking changed. It sounded softer, almost rhythmic, like breathing. She turned from the window, her candlelight trembling. "Hello?" The only answer was the sound of the rain, growing louder against the roof. She sighed, forcing a small laugh. "You're hearing things again," she whispered to herself. "It's just the storm." But then, through the steady patter of rain, she heard it, faint, barely audible, but unmistakable. A voice, low, murmuring, coming from within the wall. Her heart froze. She turned toward the hallway, candlelight flickering. The voice stopped. She stood still for a long time, waiting, listening. The only sound now was her own breathing and the rain, which began to come down in sheets. Finally, she shook her head and moved toward the kitchen. "You're just tired," she told herself. "That's all." She placed the candle on the counter and began unpacking the few groceries she'd bought that morning. The small kitchen smelled of dust and oil soap. When she opened the cabinet above the sink, a chill escaped, a cold so sharp it made her gasp. Inside, the shelves were damp. Water dripped from the back wall. She grabbed a rag and reached in to wipe it down. And then she heard it again, a whisper right behind her ear. "Margaret." She froze. The rag slipped from her hand. Her throat tightened as she turned slowly, but there was no one there. Only the candlelight flickering on the counter, the flame bowing toward her as though drawn by an unseen breath. She took a step back, her heart pounding. The house creaked again, louder this time. And then silence, the kind that feels too heavy, too perfect, too watchful. She backed into the hallway, eyes darting across the dim walls. The candlelight stretched her shadow along the floor, bending it strangely over the uneven boards. Then thunder cracked overhead, and for just an instant, the hallway filled with blinding light. When the light faded, she saw it, a wet handprint on the wallpaper, fresh, dripping. The next morning, the rain had stopped. The world outside was washed clean, sunlight spilling through the clouds. Margaret made tea and tried to convince herself it had been a dream. The sound of rain, exhaustion, loneliness, her mind playing tricks. but the handprint was still there. She tried scrubbing it with soap, bleach, even sandpaper. It wouldn't come off. It wasn't dirt or mold. It was within the wallpaper, soaked into it. That afternoon, she visited the hardware store in town. The clerk, a young man with red hair and tired eyes, raised an eyebrow when she mentioned the Hollis house. "You're staying out there?" he asked, tone somewhere between disbelief and pity. "Yes, I just moved in. Do you know anything about it?" He rubbed the back of his neck. "Ma'am, nobody's lived there long. Place old. Used to be a boarding house back in the 40s. Flood took half the town back then. Folks say the walls still hold the voices of the ones who drowned." Margaret frowned. "That's just stories." He nodded slowly. "Maybe, but you watch the rain. It don't sound the same in that place." That night, it rained again. She sat by the window, listening. The first drops tapped gently against the glass. The candle on the table swayed in the faint draft. At first, nothing unusual, just the hum of water on the roof, the sigh of wind through the trees. Then, faintly, a whisper, like before, but this time, clearer. It was her husband's voice. "Margaret." Her heart twisted. She stood, the chair scraping against the floor. "Thomas?" The whisper came again, closer. "Maggie, it's me." Tears welled in her eyes. No, you're not real." The voice softened. "Please, you left me in the storm." She pressed her hands to her ears. "Stop it!" But the sound wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from within the walls. She stumbled backward as the wallpaper began to darken, moisture blooming across its surface. The rain outside grew harder, matching the rhythm of her heartbeat. "Thomas, where are you?" The voice echoed all around her now, layered, distorted, like dozens of whispers behind his. "Here, in the rain."
The walls pulsed faintly, as if the entire house were breathing. The rain pressed harder against the windows, the thunder echoing through every beam and floorboard. Margaret stumbled backward until she hit the corner table, knocking her teacup to the ground. It shattered, the sound sharp against the whispering that now seemed to move inside her ears. "Thomas!" she whispered again. "You can't be here." But the voice didn't fade. It only grew clearer. "You promised you'd never leave me." The air turned cold. Her breath came out white. She grabbed her shawl and wrapped it around her shoulders, trembling. Lightning flashed, and for an instant she saw something in the reflection of the window. A shadow, standing just behind her, tall, familiar. When the light faded, the shadow was gone. Her chest tightened as the rain slowed and the whispers began to fade, not vanishing entirely, but retreating, like a tide slipping back into the sea. She sank to her knees, heart pounding, eyes locked on the darkened walls. For a long while, she didn't move. The only sound was the steady drip of water from the ceiling into the broken teacup. Drip, drip, drip. And underneath it, so faint she almost missed it, a sigh. By morning, the rain had stopped again, leaving behind a sky bruised with clouds. The air outside was heavy, the ground soft beneath her boots as she walked toward the mailbox at the edge of the property. The road beyond the gate was empty. Even the birds were silent. She found only one envelope inside. No stamp, no sender, just her name written in a shaky hand. She tore it open on the porch. Inside was a single piece of paper, yellowed and brittle. "Don't listen to the rain. It lies." That night, She sat by the kitchen table, staring at the note. Every creak of the floor made her jump. The silence was somehow worse than the whispers. By 9 o'clock, thunder rolled in the distance again. She closed her eyes. "Not tonight," she whispered. "Please, not tonight." But the storm didn't listen. Rain began to fall, slowly at first, then heavier, 1,000 fingers tapping the roof, then slapping against the windows in waves. She lit a candle. The wick struggled against the draft, but the tiny flame finally caught. Then she heard it again, the first whisper, not from the walls this time, but from upstairs. Her blood ran cold. "Thomas!" she called out, voice trembling. No answer, only the soft murmur of rain sliding down the roof. Then another whisper, fainter, childlike. "Not Thomas. Come upstairs, Miss Maggie." The sound of that little voice made her stomach drop. She grabbed the candle and began to climb the staircase, each step creaking beneath her feet. The air grew colder with every floor she climbed, and the whisper followed, a playful hum now, like a child's song hidden in the rain. When she reached the top landing, the sound stopped. All the doors were closed, except one, the door at the very end of the hall, half open, swaying slightly with the wind that shouldn't have been there. The wallpaper along the hall was peeling, water stains bleeding through in shapes that almost looked like faces. She hesitated, her hand shaking as she reached for the doorknob. The metal was ice cold. She pushed the door open. It was a small room, bare walls, no furniture except an old wooden chair facing the window. The rain outside ran down the glass like tears, and sitting in the chair was a doll. Its porcelain face was cracked, one glass eye missing. A faded blue ribbon was tied around its neck. Margaret's stomach twisted. She'd seen that ribbon before, in one of Thomas's old photographs, wrapped around the neck of a doll his sister had as a child. Her throat tightened. "No!" The doll tilted its head. She screamed and dropped the candle. The flame hit the wet floor, sputtered, and then went out. The room plunged into darkness. In that darkness, the whisper came again, right beside her ear. "Do you remember the rain, Maggie?" She stumbled backward, her hands scraping the wall. "Thomas, please stop!" The voice grew deeper, distorted, full of echoes. "You left me." "I tried to find you." "Then why did you lock the door?" She woke on the floor hours later, the room dry, the doll gone. The morning sun crept through the cracked window. Her clothes were damp, her skin cold. It had happened again. Only now, something had changed. The note was gone from the kitchen table, replaced by another piece of paper. "He's not alone." Margaret stared at the words until her vision blurred. Outside, the sky was clear, but the air smelled like rain. That afternoon, she walked to the library in town. The old librarian, Mrs. Halpern, looked up from behind her desk and smiled weakly. "Mrs. Pierce," she said softly, "I heard you moved into the Hollis place." Margaret hesitated. "Yes. Do you know anything about it?" Mrs. Halpern's eyes flickered. "A little. There were accidents before the flood. People who heard things when it rained. They said the house was built on a foundation that was never finished. Never finished? The woman nodded. When the builders dug the base, they found an old well beneath it. They covered it up, but water finds its way, doesn't it? Margaret's mouth dried. A well? Deep, Mrs. Halpern said. Older than the town itself, and they say it still whispers when it rains. That night, the thunder returned. Margaret sat awake on her bed, clutching the candle. The house groaned around her. The rain started as a gentle patter, then a steady roar. She waited, and right on time, the whispers came. But this time, they didn't come from one voice. They came from dozens, all around her, beneath the floor, inside the walls, above the ceiling, murmuring, calling her name. Margaret! She stood slowly, her breath shaking. The floor trembled. Then she heard it again, a child's giggle, and from beneath her feet, through the cracks in the boards, water began to seep up, dark, cold, rising. The water seeped faster, swirling around her feet as if it were searching for something. Margaret backed toward the corner of the bedroom, clutching the candle and shaking hands. Its light wavered across the floorboards as the water spread, dark and glistening, smelling faintly of rot. From somewhere beneath the boards came the unmistakable sound of a heartbeat, slow, steady, deep. She dropped to her knees, pressing her ear against the damp wood. The sound grew louder, thump, 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 and then words, muffled, fragmented, as if someone was speaking from deep underground. Not alone. Her throat closed. Thomas, she whispered. The heartbeat quickened. The water rose to her ankles now, rippling around her as if something beneath was moving. Who's down there? She cried, but the only answer was the rain pounding harder against the roof. She scrambled up, grabbing the nearest thing she could find, a metal poker from the fireplace, and pried at the boards. One came loose with a crack. Another. The water poured through faster, dark and cold. And then something grabbed her wrist. A hand, small, wet, ice cold. Margaret screamed, tearing herself free, stumbling backward into the wall. The candle went out, plunging the room into darkness. She could still feel the grip on her skin, a faint pressure that pulsed like it was still there. Then, from the open gap in the floor, a voice whispered up, "He isn't who you think he is." Margaret sat on the floor for hours, staring at the hole in the boards. The rain eventually slowed. The whispers faded, but the memory of that voice wouldn't leave her. By morning, she was exhausted, her eyes red from lack of sleep. The floorboards, where she'd pried them open, had dried strangely fast. No trace of water, no sign anything had happened at all. She wrapped her hand in a towel, still shaking. The bruises around her wrist looked like tiny fingerprints. That afternoon, she went back into town. The same young clerk was behind the counter at the hardware store. He looked up and froze when he saw her. "Ma'am, you look like you've seen a ghost." She forced a hollow laugh. "Something like that." He hesitated before lowering his voice. "Did you hear them?" Margaret frowned. "Who?" "The voices. When it rains." She stared at him. "You've heard them too?" He nodded. "Once. My uncle worked on that house years back. Said he quit after the well started leaking through the floor.
He used to say he could hear people whispering his name whenever a storm rolled in. Did he ever go back? The clerk's expression darkened. No, he drowned. Not in the lake, though. In his bathtub. Middle of summer. They found mud under his nails. Margaret felt the blood drain from her face. Do you know what's under that house? He glanced around as if afraid to be overheard. Only what folks whisper. They say that well's not just deep, it's endless. No one ever hit the bottom. Said it was older than the town, maybe older than anything built on this land. By the time she returned home, the sky was already bruising again. The clouds gathered heavy and low, lightning flashing deep within them. She didn't light a candle this time. She sat in the dark, waiting. The rain began just before midnight. The first whisper came almost immediately, but it wasn't Thomas this time. It was her own voice. Maggie, it breathed. You knew, didn't you? Her stomach turned. She clutched the chair until her knuckles went white. No, I didn't. The walls began to moan. The wallpaper bulged outward as if the house itself was exhaling. Water trickled down from the ceiling, running in slow streams that met on the floor and formed words. Tiny, trembling letters that spread across the boards. Help us. Lightning split the sky again, and the words vanished, replaced by dozens of small, wet handprints spreading out across the floor. She stumbled backward, knocking over a chair. The rain outside grew deafening. From beneath her, through the floorboards, came the sound of children laughing, soft at first, then louder, rising in pitch until it became a shriek. The floor shuddered violently. One of the boards snapped beneath her foot, and for a moment she saw it. The black space below, filled not with dirt or stone, but water and faces. Dozens of pale faces floating just beneath the surface, their mouths open in silent screams. Then the board gave way completely, and she fell. She hit the water hard, the cold stealing the air from her lungs. She sank fast, her candlelight vanishing above her. The darkness swallowed her whole. Something brushed against her leg, then another. She thrashed, clawing at the water, but hands grabbed her from every side, gripping her arms, her dress, her hair. They weren't pulling her down. They were holding her still, and in front of her, out of the darkness, a faint light appeared. A woman's face, pale and ghostly, her hair floating like a veil. Margaret's heart stopped. The woman opened her mouth, and a stream of water poured out, but the voice that came through it was clear, calm, and full of sorrow. Do you want to know what he did? Who? Margaret gasped. Your husband. Margaret's eyes widened. Thomas? The ghost nodded slowly. He opened the well. The hands around her tightened. The ghost's eyes glowed faintly. He promised us he'd close it again, the ghost said softly. But when the storm came, he ran, and we drowned. Margaret shook her head, choking. That's not true. The ghost's expression twisted, sorrow turning to anger. He ran, and we drowned. The water around her churned violently, pulling her deeper. The ghost screamed, her voice echoing like thunder beneath the waves. Margaret fought, kicking, clawing, desperate for the surface. Then just as suddenly, she broke through, gasping, coughing, collapsing onto the wet boards of her living room. The house was silent again. But when she looked up, the walls were dripping, and carved into the plaster above the fireplace, still fresh and wet, were 4 words. He opened it again.
The morning after the storm, the world outside seemed unnaturally quiet, the kind of silence that made the ears ache. The Hollis house dripped softly in that silence, its roof still bleeding thin trails of water down the gutters, its walls breathing in the leftover damp. Margaret woke on the living room floor, her dress still soaked through, her throat raw from screaming. The memory of the ghost's face lingered behind her eyes, pale, swollen, hair like floating weeds, and those words carved in the wall burned in her mind. "He opened it again." She sat up slowly, staring at the message. The letters shimmered faintly in the sunlight, as though written in something more than water. For a moment, she wanted to leave, to walk down the dirt road until the house vanished behind her, but she couldn't. Something in that whisper, that accusation had cut too deep. Her husband, Thomas, he had opened something, and now it was open again. She found his old journals in a trunk upstairs. They smelled faintly of mildew and cedar. The handwriting, looping, neat, familiar, felt like a ghost itself. Most of it was mundane. Notes about his work at the school, church events, and the constant, unpredictable weather. But the last few entries grew strange. July 3rd. The well is deeper than they said. The old boards gave way, and I heard it. The rain stopped when I looked down. April 10th. The voices started again. They called to me at night. I thought it was the wind, but they know my name. April 18th. I covered it, but I can still feel it breathing beneath the house. Margaret's fingers trembled as she turned the pages. The final entry was short. April 23rd. The rain is coming. I can't close it. That night clouds gathered again, heavy, black and low. Margaret didn't light candles this time. She sat by the window, staring out at the marsh beyond the trees, waiting for the storm. When the first raindrops fell, she whispered, "I know what you want." The house groaned softly in response. The boards beneath her feet creaked, stretching like the limbs of something waking from sleep. Lightning flashed, and for a second she saw her reflection in the glass, pale, eyes hollow. Behind it, another reflection appeared. Thomas. She turned, heart pounding, but the room was empty. Then his voice came again, not from behind her, but from beneath. "Maggie, help me." She froze. "Thomas?" The floorboards vibrated with each word, the sound moving like water through the house. "Help me, before they do." She dropped to her knees, pressing her hand to the floor. "Where are you?" The rain answered for him, hitting the roof harder, faster, until the sound became a constant roar. The whispers rose again, dozens of them, hundreds of them, all speaking over each other, forming words that dissolved before she could understand. Then, all at once, silence, and a knock from under the floor. Once, twice, then again, slow, rhythmic, like a heartbeat. She grabbed the metal poker again and pried at the boards. They lifted easily this time, as though the house itself wanted them to come loose. The smell that rose from below made her gag, wet earth, mold, and something metallic. When she shone her lantern down, she saw it, a hollow space beneath the house, a crawl space that went much deeper than it should. She lowered herself in, her feet sinking into the wet soil. The air was thick and cold, full of the slow drip of water. She moved forward on her hands and knees, the lantern's flame flickering. Then she saw it, the well. It sat at the very center of the hollow, the stones slick with moisture, moss crawling down its sides. The cover was broken, splintered wood pushed aside as if something had forced its way out. The whispering returned, clearer than ever. Close it! She leaned closer, peering into the darkness below. The air rising from the well was cold enough to burn her skin. Close it, Maggie! Her husband's voice again. Thomas? Please, it's open. Lightning flashed outside, and through the gaps in the floor above, light cut across the space, revealing something else. Footprints. Dozens of them. Small, muddy footprints circling the well, leading toward her, and then disappearing into the dirt. She stumbled backward, but her heel caught on something hard. She looked down. It was a hand. Not real. Stone. Carved. Small. Like part of a statue. But it was clutching a scrap of fabric. The same blue ribbon she'd seen on the doll upstairs. She bent to pick it up, and from the well a sound rose that didn't belong to this world. Not a whisper, not a voice, a scream. It tore through the air, shaking the walls of the crawl space. The lantern shattered in her hand. She scrambled backward, crawling as fast as she could, her palms sinking into mud and bone. Behind her, the well began to overflow, not with water, but with hands. Dozens of pale, writhing hands reaching up, clawing through the stones, dragging themselves toward her. She pulled herself up through the hole in the floor, gasping, slamming the boards shut behind her. The rain outside was deafening now. The windows shook, the roof groaned, and through it all came that endless chorus of whispers. She pressed her back to the wall, trembling. Then, through the noise, a single voice rose above the rest, clear, calm, and heartbreakingly familiar. Her husband. Maggie, you have to finish what I couldn't. The storm lasted until dawn. When the light finally broke through the clouds, the house had gone still again. Margaret sat in the corner, wrapped in her blanket, staring at the floor. She didn't move for hours, but when she finally stood, something in her eyes had changed. She walked to the old shed behind the house and came back carrying a hammer, nails, and a wooden board. If the well had been opened, she was going to close it, even if she had to do it herself.
The morning hung gray over the wetlands, heavy and still, as if the storm had exhausted even the sky. But inside the Hollis house, the air hadn't quieted. It pulsed faintly, like something deep within the walls, still breathing. Margaret carried the hammer and nails to the spot where the boards had splintered the night before. She knelt, pressing her hand against the wood. It was dry now, impossibly dry, like the storm had never touched it. But beneath that dryness, she could feel the faintest vibration, a steady hum that rose up through her skin and into her bones. She whispered to the empty room, "I'm going to end this." And somewhere in the house, something whispered back, "You can't." The crawl space was darker than she remembered. The air was wet again, thick and cold, carrying the same smell, earth and iron. Her lantern flickered as she descended, each step groaning under her weight. The well waited for her, like a wound in the center of the earth. Its stones were slick, black now instead of gray, and the water within it moved, though the air was still. Margaret approached cautiously, the tools in her shaking hands. "Thomas," she said softly, "if you can hear me, I'm sorry." The whisper came immediately. "Don't." Her grip on the hammer tightened. "You told me to close it." "You don't understand," the voice said, hollow, echoing up from the depths. "It doesn't close. It feeds. What are you?" There was silence. Then, a sound like breathing multiplied, the sound of many lungs gasping in rhythm. When the voice spoke again, it wasn't just Thomas's. It was hundreds, layered together in a terrible harmony. We are what the rain remembers. Margaret stumbled back, the hammer slipping from her hands. The water in the well began to move faster now, swirling, rising against the stones. Something glowed within it, faint, bluish light, like fire beneath glass. Then she saw the shapes, faces, hundreds of them, pressing against the inside of the water as if it were glass. Open mouths, dark eyes, their movements rippling the surface from below. Each one whispered her name. Margaret, Margaret. She dropped to her knees, hands clamped over her ears. Stop! Stop it! The whispers grew louder. The water rose. Then, all at once, it stilled, and one face remained. Thomas. He looked just as she remembered him. Hair slicked back, eyes soft, lips trembling like he wanted to cry. Maggie, he whispered, you can't shut it. You have to give it what it wants. Tears blurred her vision. What does it want? He looked up toward her, and for a moment she thought she saw love there, the man she'd buried, the husband she'd mourned. Then his expression changed. Cold, empty. It wants you. The light in the well exploded. The air filled with a shriek that shook the floor above. Margaret screamed as a blast of icy wind surged up from the depths, throwing her backward into the mud. The boards above rattled, dust raining down in a fine mist. Hands erupted from the water again, dozens, hundreds, clawing for her, pulling at her arms, her dress, her hair. Their touch burned like frostbite. She kicked, screamed, grabbed the hammer again and swung at them blindly. Each hit sent a burst of black water flying, but the hands kept coming. Through it all, she could hear him, Thomas, whispering over the noise, "Come home, Maggie. You left me. You left us." "I didn't!" she screamed. "You died in the storm. I tried to save you." His voice turned hollow. "No, you locked the door." Her breath caught because she remembered that night, years ago, the rain hammering against the windows, the wind screaming through the trees. She had run for the cellar, shouting for him to follow, but he'd gone outside trying to save their things from the flood, and she saw the wave of water coming down the hill. She had slammed the cellar door. She hadn't meant to lock it. She'd only wanted to keep the water out, but he'd been pounding on it, screaming, until he didn't anymore. Her knees gave out. She sank into the mud, sobbing, "I'm sorry, Thomas. I didn't know. I didn't." The hands stopped. The air stilled. The whispering faded to silence. And then, slowly, the water began to rise. Not violently this time, but smooth, steady, like it was waiting for her. Thomas's voice came again, gentler now. "Come with me. It's quiet here." She looked into the water. His face floated just beneath the surface, calm and pale. For the first time since she moved into the house, she felt peace. No voices, no fear, just rain and the soft glow of the water. She leaned closer, her reflection merging with his. "Just one step," he whispered, and she almost did. But then, behind him, she saw another face, a woman's, the same ghost who'd spoken to her before, her eyes wide with warning. "No, don't." The ghost's face pressed closer to the surface, her lips trembling. "Because he isn't Thomas." The water erupted upward. Margaret fell backward, choking as the black flood surged over her. The well overflowed, filling the crawlspace in seconds. She crawled toward the opening in the floor above, gasping, kicking as something grabbed her ankle and dragged her down. She clawed at the dirt, nails tearing, the world spinning around her. Then, just as she was pulled beneath the surface, lightning split the air, and she saw what was dragging her. Not Thomas. Something using his face. Its body was stretched and twisted, its skin rippling like the surface of water. Beneath that thin layer, other faces moved, trapped, shifting, screaming silently. "Stay," it hissed through her husband's lips. "You're one of us now." She screamed, drove her nails into its arm and whipped. The skin tore open like wet paper. The thing recoiled, shrieking. Margaret lunged upward, gripping the edge of the floor above, pulling herself through the opening with the last of her strength. She rolled onto the boards, coughing, her body shaking uncontrollably. The water below stopped rising. The whispering faded, and then silence. For a moment, she thought it was over, but when she looked down, she saw the floorboards moving, bulging upward, as if something beneath was breathing.
The boards beneath Margaret's hands swelled and pulsed, the sound of water sloshing beneath them like a second heartbeat. The air was damp and heavy, every breath thick with the smell of mud and something faintly metallic, like blood that had forgotten to dry. She stumbled back from the spot, dragging herself to her feet. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but her legs felt weak, her mind fogged. The whispering wasn't gone, it had just changed. Now, it came from above, soft at first, then louder. The ceiling groaned. A trickle of black water ran down from between the planks and fell onto her face, cold as death. When she looked up, she saw fingers pushing through the wood. 10, 20, dozens, pale, swollen fingers forcing their way down through the gaps, clawing blindly for her. She screamed and stumbled backward into the hallway. The chandelier swayed violently overhead, each crystal drop trembling with the rhythm of the rain hammering against the roof. The whispering grew chaotic, hundreds of voices overlapping, echoing through every wall and floorboard, and in between them, one voice, low, calm, deliberate. "You can't leave, Maggie. Not until it's full." The door at the end of the hallway burst open, slamming against the wall. The small bedroom where she'd found the doll was now soaked, the rain pouring through a hole in the ceiling. The floor shimmered with shallow water that reflected the flicker of lightning like glass. The doll sat upright in the chair again, only now it wasn't cracked, it wasn't broken, it was wet and breathing. Its tiny chest rose and fell, its porcelain face glistening with moisture. When lightning flashed, its glass eyes rolled toward her. Margaret pressed herself against the wall, shaking her head. No, you're not real." The doll smiled, and in a voice far too old for its body, it whispered, "He promised us peace, but he gave us rain." Margaret turned and ran, her feet splashing through the water that now reached her ankles. She grabbed the front door handle, twisted, but it wouldn't budge. The knob turned uselessly, as if the lock were melted into the wood. Then came another sound, a low, distant bell. It rang once, then again, and with each chime, the lights flickered. She turned toward the sound and saw the front window fogging over from the inside. Slowly, letters began to form in the condensation. "The well isn't below." Her blood ran cold. She whispered, "Then where is it?" The next lightning flash answered her. The floor split down the middle, the boards snapping like ribs. Water erupted upward, hitting the ceiling and cascading down like a fountain. The chandelier crashed to the floor in a burst of glass and light. Margaret screamed and leapt back as the gap widened, and beneath it she saw not dirt or stone, but water, moving sideways, flowing like a river through the walls themselves. Every drop of rain outside was finding its way inside now, filling the house from within. The wallpaper peeled back, revealing slick black veins that pulsed beneath it, veins of wet wood, living and alive. The house moaned again. It wasn't collapsing. It was waking up. Margaret staggered toward the staircase, but each step was soft, spongy, waterlogged. The banister bent under her grip. The house seemed to breathe with her, inhaling as she exhaled, creaking when she moved. As she reached the second floor, a door slammed behind her, then another. The hallway stretched, impossibly long now, each doorway repeating into darkness. At the far end, faintly lit by the glow of lightning through a shattered window, she saw Thomas. He stood still, his head tilted, his body shimmering like a reflection on the surface of water. Margaret stumbled back. "You're not him." The thing smiled. "I was, and I will be again, when the rain brings you home." He reached for her, his hand stretching, bones cracking as his arm elongated like wet clay. She screamed and bolted into the nearest room, the study. The door slammed behind her, the lock sliding into place on its own. Inside, the air was freezing, the walls dripped. She turned and saw a painting hanging crooked above the fireplace. A painting of the well. But this time, it wasn't outside. It was drawn as part of the house itself, right in the center of its foundation, spreading upward like veins. The caption beneath it read, "The house that holds the rain." Her hand trembled as she reached up to touch the canvas. It was wet. When she pressed her fingers to it, ripples spread across the surface like water. She pulled back in horror, and the painting began to move. The house in the image twisted and shifted, its walls turning black, its windows filling with faces. The well in the center began to glow. From the fireplace came a low groan, followed by the sound of dripping. She turned, just as a stream of black water began to pour from the chimney, flooding the hearth. The whispers filled the room again, surrounding her. "Maggie, come home. Close it. Let it feed." Her head spun. She cried, "I don't know what you want." The voices grew louder, overlapping until they became a single chorus of sound, a tidal wave of grief, rage, and sorrow. Then cutting through them, one last voice, clear, young, human. The little girl from the doll whispered, "Don't listen. It doesn't want you. It wants the sky." The words hit her like a jolt. The sky. The well wasn't just beneath her. It was through her, through the walls, through the roof, reaching upward. Every storm, every drop of rain fed it. And if she didn't stop it, it would never stop raining again. Margaret grabbed the broken lantern from the floor, soaked in oil. Her hands shook as she pulled the flint from her pocket. The house moaned again, the floor trembling. "Don't!" the voice hissed through the walls. But she struck the flint anyway. The spark caught, the fire hissed, and sputtered, then burst to life. The painting went up first, its surface bubbling, the image of the well twisting and writhing as if alive. Flames raced up the walls, licking across the ceiling. The house screamed, a deep guttural sound that made the floor buckle beneath her feet. She turned and ran, the heat at her back, smoke filling the hallway. Behind her, the whispers turned into shrieks. The house was dying, or trying to drag her down with it. Margaret reached the front door again and slammed her shoulder against it. It gave way this time, bursting open.
Rain poured in, colliding with the fire and hissing bursts of steam. She stumbled into the yard, coughing, her clothes soaked, her skin burning from the heat and cold. Behind her, the Hollis house burned like a beacon in the storm. Every window glowed red, and in each one, faces appeared, hundreds of them, pressing against the glass, screaming. Then, one by one, the windows shattered and water poured out.
She turned toward the road, but something stopped her. From inside the flames, through the smoke and rain, she saw Thomas one last time, standing in the doorway, smiling. "Thank you," he whispered. Then the roof collapsed, and the Hollis house sank into the earth.
When the fire finally died, it left behind no flame, no smoke, only steam rising from the crater where the Hollis house had stood. The rain slowed to a drizzle, soft and uncertain, as if the sky itself was afraid to continue. Margaret stood at the edge of what used to be her porch, the hammer still in her trembling hand. Everything she had known, her home, her husband, her grief, was gone. The wet earth hissed beneath her feet, the smell of burned wood and rain mixing in a thick, ghostly haze. And then silence. For the first time since she'd arrived, there were no whispers, no voices behind the walls, just the quiet. She took a step forward, the mud sucking at her boots. The ground where the house had been was split open now, a deep, black fissure that ran like a scar through the earth. She peered into it, expecting to see water, but it wasn't water. It was light, pale, endless, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. Margaret knelt, leaning closer. The warmth from the glow brushed her face. For a moment, she thought she saw movement, not shapes, not people, but memories. Her wedding day, Thomas smiling, the classroom where she used to teach, the laughter of children, and then a voice, soft, clear. "You closed it." Her breath caught. "Who are you?" The light flickered gently. "Someone who was forgotten." "Are you free now?" she whispered. The voice hesitated. "For now, but the rain always remembers." The glow began to fade, sinking deeper into the crack until it disappeared. Margaret sat there for a long time, staring at the empty space. By morning, the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in weeks. The wetlands glistened in the light, and a mist rose from the ground like a sigh. The town awoke slowly, the air thick with the scent of wet earth. When Sheriff Nolan arrived at the edge of the property, he found Margaret sitting in the mud, barefoot, her hands blackened with soot. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "what happened here?" She turned to look at him, her eyes hollow but calm. "It's gone," she whispered. He frowned. "The house?" She nodded slowly. "It was never a house. It was a door." The sheriff exchanged a look with his deputy, who muttered under his breath, "A door to what?" Margaret didn't answer. She stood shakily and looked up at the sky. The clouds were thin now, streaks of gray over pale blue, but she could still hear it, faint, far away, a whisper, almost like rain. She left town that afternoon, walking until the road turned to gravel and then to dirt. She didn't take the main road. She followed the water instead, the narrow streams and creeks that wound their way through the fields, whispering quietly to themselves. Everywhere she went, the sky stayed gray, and once in a while,
When the wind was right, she thought she heard her name, not with fear this time, but with something close to forgiveness. Months passed. The land where the Hollis house once stood grew over with weeds and wildflowers. The townspeople avoided it, crossing themselves whenever thunder rolled in, but they said sometimes after a storm, when the air was thick with mist, you could hear it again, the sound of rain falling where there was no roof, and if you stood close enough and listened carefully, you could almost make out a woman's voice among the drops, not crying, not begging, just whispering. It's closed now. Years later, when new settlers came through the valley, they built a small cottage near the edge of the old foundation. They never knew the land's history. The builder, a quiet man named Carter, laughed when the locals warned him about the rain house. Just old ghost stories, he said. But on the night they raised the final walls, a storm rolled in. It started soft, then harder. By midnight, the whole valley was drowning in water, and through the storm, from beneath the floorboards of that new house, Carter's wife awoke to the sound of whispering, the same words again. He opened it again. The rain fell harder, carrying the sound down the valley, through the trees, into the marshes, the same whisper echoing through the storm, endlessly repeating itself, passing from one drop to another. It reached the edge of the road, where the old sign still stood, half buried in the mud. The paint was almost gone now, the letters worn thin, but when lightning struck the marsh, the reflection in the puddles showed something else, a perfect, unbroken image of the old house, windows lit, doors open, waiting. And if you ever find yourself driving through southern Louisiana on a night when the rain doesn't seem to end, when the thunder feels too close and the road grows slick and black beneath your tires, you might hear it too, a faint whisper carried on the wind, soft as breath against your ear. Don't stop, don't look, don't listen, because somewhere out there the rain is remembering and the Hollis house is listening. Grimora.